I've always dreamed of a perfect family. Growing up in foster care in Austin, Texas, I felt isolated and alone, yearning for something stable and loving. I envisioned a family where I'd find joy and security, a loving husband, delightful children, and a home filled with warmth. When David, a man I met through mutual friends, proposed to me, I thought my dream was finally coming true. David was 34 years old, 2 years older than me. He had a stable job in logistics, and I, at 32, worked as a marketing manager at a tech company. Our relationship seemed perfect. David was charming, and we both wanted the same things out of life. But after we married, everything started to unravel. The first few months of our marriage were idyllic. However, it didn't take long for David's true colors to show. He became increasingly demanding and lazy. Instead of contributing to our household, he began to boss me around. "Sarah, make dinner now," he'd say as soon as I got home from work. "Alice and Mom are starving." His sister Alice, who was 26 years old, and his mother both lived with us. Neither of them lifted a finger around the house. David eventually quit his job in logistics, claiming that he had a falling out with his boss and needed to focus on his family obligations. This left me to handle everything. I worked hard every day, coming home to cook, clean, and take care of all the household responsibilities. Despite the long hours at my marketing job, I felt like I was working double time, just to keep up with everything David, Alice, and his mother left undone. One day, I received an unexpected visit from David's logistics department manager. He looked exhausted as he shared some troubling news about David. Apparently, David's poor work ethic had caused significant issues. He'd often leave work unfinished and pass on his overtime to timid colleagues. When his manager confronted him, David got angry and accused the management of being heartless. His excuse for leaving work early was always about his family, claiming he needed to tend to his frail mother and sister. The manager informed me that David's behavior was a major problem in the department. He used his family situation as an excuse to avoid his responsibilities, which was causing a lot of stress for his colleagues. They were overburdened and mentally exhausted. Eventually, when David's manager insisted he finish his work properly, David quit on the spot, which led to a lot of trouble for his coworkers. I felt a mix of relief and guilt after hearing this. I knew David wasn't a good worker, but hearing it from his manager made it clearer. I apologized profusely for the trouble David had caused, and the manager assured me that it wasn't my fault. He mentioned that David had quit without even talking to me about his decision. I was already overwhelmed with managing all the household chores and finances alone, while David, Alice, and his mother continued to contribute nothing. David claimed he was working part-time at a local cafe, but his real focus was on his sister Alice's demands. Alice, who had recently turned 26, frequently asked for money from David. With no other sources of income, David handed her what he could. Meanwhile, his mother took money from my wallet without asking, which I discovered when I went to buy groceries. One evening, I met Tom, a 27-year-old barista and student, when he brought a very drunk Alice home. Tom seemed polite and honest. He shared that Alice had lied to him about her job and character, which was unsettling to hear. Over time, Tom and I started talking more, and he became a friend. As things continued to deteriorate at home, David announced he wanted to give his family my savings, which amounted to $50,000, to cover their expenses. He threatened that if I refused, he'd divorce me. I had been saving this money for our future, but David's selfishness was pushing me to my limits. I decided to confront the situation head-on. I had already prepared divorce papers, knowing that David's demands would eventually reach this breaking point. I handed him the papers, and he signed them without hesitation. I left David, Alice, and his mother behind and returned to my foster father's home. He had always been a strong pillar of support for me, and I needed that stability now more than ever. Life at my foster father's house was a mix of relief and uncertainty. I felt safe there, but the weight of my recent decisions and the strain of rebuilding was daunting. I knew that turning my life around would require more than just leaving David. It would involve facing the mess he'd left behind and confronting the people who had contributed to my misery. One day, as I was organizing my things, I received a call from Tom. He had heard about the trouble I'd been through and wanted to check in. He was working as a barista and studying part-time, but he was kind enough to offer a listening ear. When he asked how things were going, I couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration and sadness. I explained how David had handed over $50,000 of our savings to his family and left me in financial ruin. Tom listened intently. "You know, I've seen Alice around," he said, "and she's not the sweet girl she pretends to be. She's quite manipulative, and it sounds like David was enabling her." His words resonated with me. David had always made excuses for Alice's behavior, insisting she was in a tough spot. Yet, it became clear that David had been complicit in her demands for money. His job at the cafe barely brought in any income, leaving him with little to contribute. As I was settling into my new routine, my foster father's influence began to show its impact. He had always been well-connected and wealthy, and his support was instrumental in helping me regain my footing. Despite this, the emotional and financial toll of David's actions remained heavy on my shoulders. Then one evening, I had a surprising encounter. I walked into a local bar, a place Tom had recommended, hoping for a change of scenery. To my astonishment, Tom was there, working behind the counter. We exchanged friendly smiles, and he poured me a drink. As we chatted, he shared more about what he had discovered regarding David and his family. Tom revealed that David, Alice, and their mother had taken a lavish overseas trip. The trip was extravagant, filled with gambling and lavish spending, all funded by the money David had taken from me. This revelation was a shock. It was like David had used our savings to escape responsibility and indulge in luxury, leaving me to pick up the pieces. To make matters worse, David attempted to access the remaining funds I had hidden. I had given him a fake passbook to protect my savings, and thankfully, he didn't realize the money was safe from his grasp. Tom helped me confront David over the phone, demanding he repay a bar tab for Alice's drinks. David's financial troubles were worsening, and he was growing increasingly desperate. As the weeks passed, David's situation deteriorated further. Desperate for money, he borrowed from dubious sources, which led him into even deeper debt. To pay off his growing debts, David ended up working on a fishing boat, something far removed from his previous job in logistics. Alice and their mother, who had also racked up significant debts from their gambling spree, were forced to find work to repay their own debts. Meanwhile, my foster father had been closely monitoring the situation. He revealed that he had orchestrated David's financial downfall as a form of protection for me. His connections and resources were used to ensure David faced the consequences of his actions. It was a harsh but necessary step to prevent David from causing more damage. My foster father had advised me to safeguard my belongings, including my jewelry and house, which I did. With David and his family in financial disarray and the threat they once posed diminished, I felt a newfound sense of relief. My foster father's support and Tom's unexpected friendship had been crucial in navigating this tumultuous period. As I adjusted to my new life, the pain of betrayal slowly began to ease. Tom and I grew closer, and I started to see him in a new light. Despite the chaos and heartache I had endured, his kindness and honesty were a breath of fresh air. Our friendship began to blossom into something more, offering a glimpse of hope and happiness amidst the ruins of my past. The financial and emotional strain caused by David's actions had been immense, but with each passing day, I felt more equipped to face the future. I knew that despite the pain, this journey was leading me toward something better. And with Tom by my side and my foster father's unwavering support, I began to believe that a happier chapter was just around the corner. As the weeks turned into months, my life slowly began to stabilize. Returning to my foster father's home was a necessary step, but it was Tom's friendship and support that truly helped me rebuild. Our connection grew deeper, and I found comfort in his company. He was everything David was not: kind, genuine, and supportive. One evening, while we were enjoying a quiet dinner at my foster father's house, I received a call from Tom. He wanted to meet me at the bar where he worked. I agreed, knowing it would be a pleasant diversion from the routine I was getting used to. When I arrived, Tom greeted me with his usual warm smile. We found a quiet corner, away from the hustle of the bar, and started talking. Tom's presence had been a source of comfort, but there was more to discuss. "Sarah," he began, "I wanted to update you on what's been happening with David. I've been keeping an ear out, and it seems he's gotten himself into even more trouble." I listened intently, dreading what I might hear. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Tom explained that David, Alice, and their mother had gone on an extravagant overseas trip, spending recklessly on gambling and luxury. They had used the $50,000 David had taken from our savings, and it had left them deep in debt. They were living a life of excess, while I struggled to recover from their actions. Despite their lavish spending, David had been trying to get to my remaining savings. I had given him a fake passbook to protect the money, but I knew he was desperate. Tom and I had worked together to confront David over the phone, demanding that he repay a bar tab for Alice's drinks. It was a small victory, but it was symbolic of the justice I sought. The situation worsened when David borrowed money from dubious sources, falling deeper into financial trouble. His attempt to cover his debts led him to work on a fishing boat, far from the comfortable life he had once known in logistics. Meanwhile, Alice and their mother were also struggling. They had no choice but to find work to repay the debts they had accumulated during their gambling spree. It was a harsh reality for David and his family, but it felt like a small measure of justice. My foster father had used his influence to ensure that David faced consequences for his actions. The financial downfall wasn't just a punishment, it was a safeguard to ensure that David couldn't come after me or my resources any longer. Tom and I continued to grow closer, and our relationship evolved from friendship into something more profound. I could see a future with him, one that was far removed from the pain and betrayal of my past. His unwavering support and genuine affection helped heal some of the wounds left by David's deceit. One day, as Tom and I were enjoying a quiet afternoon together, my foster father sat us down for a serious conversation. He wanted to discuss the future and how he could continue to support me. His generosity had been immense, and I was grateful for everything he had done. He reminded me to protect my remaining assets and to stay vigilant. His advice was always practical and filled with wisdom. "It's important to stay smart about your finances," he said. "I've seen how people can take advantage when you're vulnerable. Keep your valuables secure and always be cautious about who you trust." His words resonated deeply. The experience with David had taught me the hard way about trust and security. I had to be cautious about my future and the people I allowed into my life. As the months passed, David's situation seemed to stabilize, though it was far from ideal. He continued working on the fishing boat, struggling to make ends meet. Alice and their mother were also working hard to repay their debts. The life they once enjoyed had been replaced with the reality of hard labor and financial strain. Meanwhile, Tom and I were building a new life together. Despite the challenges, we found solace in each other's company. We supported each other through the aftermath of my past and looked forward to a brighter future. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it was being replaced by the promise of something better. My foster father's continued support was invaluable. He had not only helped me through the immediate crisis, but had also been a source of guidance as I navigated this new chapter. With his encouragement and Tom's steadfast presence, I began to believe in the possibility of true happiness. As I looked back on everything that had transpired, I felt a mix of relief and hope. The road to recovery was still ongoing, but I was no longer facing it alone. With Tom by my side and the lessons learned from my experiences, I was ready to embrace the future with optimism. As the weeks continued to pass, life began to take on a new rhythm. Tom and I were becoming inseparable, and our relationship was growing stronger. Each day, I found myself feeling more hopeful about the future. My foster father's support had been crucial, and Tom's companionship was a source of daily joy. One evening, Tom and I were having dinner when my foster father called me into his study. I knew it was going to be an important conversation, so I felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. When I entered, he was sitting at his desk with a thoughtful expression. "Sarah," he began, "I wanted to talk to you about how things have been going and offer some final advice." He went on to explain that he had been keeping a close eye on David's situation. David and his family had managed to work off some of their debt, but their financial struggles were far from over. They had been living with the consequences of their actions, and it was a harsh lesson they were learning the hard way. Tom and I had done our part to ensure David couldn't reach my savings. David had borrowed money from questionable sources, leading to even more trouble. Eventually, he had taken a job on a fishing boat, while Alice and their mother had found work to start repaying their debts. The extravagant lifestyle they had enjoyed was now a distant memory. My foster father revealed that he had orchestrated much of this to protect me. He had always been clear about the need to safeguard my assets and valuables, and his actions were meant to ensure David wouldn't be able to cause me any more harm. I was grateful for his foresight and support during this turbulent time. "You've been through so much," my foster father said with a reassuring smile. "I want you to know that I'm proud of how you've handled everything. You've grown so much from these experiences." I thanked him, deeply moved by his words. His support had been unwavering, and I knew that without it, my journey would have been far more difficult. The emotional and financial stability he provided was a cornerstone in my recovery. Tom and I continued to grow closer, and it became clear that we were building something meaningful. One day, while we were walking through a park, Tom turned to me with a serious look in his eyes. He took my hand and said, "Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about us. I want you to know that I care about you deeply and want to build a future together." His words filled me with joy. I realized that despite the pain of the past, I had found someone who truly valued me. Our relationship was a beacon of hope and love in my life. In a final twist, Tom's support and my foster father's guidance proved to be pivotal. My foster father had always admired Tom and was supportive of our relationship. His approval meant a lot to both of us. As Tom and I discussed our future, we decided to take things step by step, enjoying each moment and building a life based on trust and mutual respect. Looking back, I could see how much I had learned from this journey. The betrayal and challenges had led me to discover my own strength and resilience. The importance of loyalty and friendship had been reinforced, and I felt more equipped to face whatever came next. The financial troubles caused by David's actions had been substantial. He had misused $50,000 of our savings, and his debts had led him to borrow from dubious sources. His attempts to cover his tracks had only resulted in more hardship for him and his family. Meanwhile, I had safeguarded my remaining money with the fake passbook and ensured that David couldn't access it. With Tom by my side and my foster father's continued support, I was ready to embrace a future filled with hope and possibility. The road to happiness was not without its bumps, but I had learned valuable lessons along the way. My story was one of overcoming adversity and finding true happiness after betrayal. As Tom and I looked toward the future, we knew that our journey together would be filled with new experiences and challenges. But we faced it with a shared sense of purpose and optimism. With the past behind us and a bright future ahead, we were ready to build a life filled with love and joy.